Everybody knows Steve Englehart, I think. Anybody who doesn't? No?
Why would you be here?
Well, because they might say that's an interesting name. Let me,
Place to sit
let me see.
down.
I might sit, I might stand. It depends on how I'm feeling. What I wanted to do with this is something a little odd. I didn't want to prepare questions. I just wanted to ask Steve questions, and we'll see where it goes. If it works out, fine. If it doesn't, we'll do better tomorrow.
And you guys can probably ask questions too.
Yeah, that's why
Gotta clear it with him.
we're collecting this stuff, and I've got some goodies over there that I can give away as well. All right, so what's my first random question?
Here.
No, I mean from me.
That's really random.
I think you probably already asked him.
Writing. What's it all about?
Gravity, how does that work? Well, I mean, you know, I got my college degree in psychology because I was interested in why people are the way they are, and I discovered by the time I got the degree that psychology wasn't going to tell me. Psychology has many different theories, all of which are useful, but I wanted an answer. And I don't know that I've ever gotten it, but I did find that writing gave me a chance to get inside people's heads. And so to me, doing the different characters, exploring why people do what they do and so forth was what was interesting to me. If you're asking about the mechanics of it, I mean, you sit by yourself in a room and think up stuff that you hope will be interesting to people.
So you see, so your starting point was that you were interested in why people do what they do and how they are.
Yeah.
Which makes me think that, you know, your preference when writing, let's say if we begin with the comic books, putting aside all the other writing you've done, is not so much that you wanted to like have a Captain America meet or come up against this bad guy, or Batman come up against this bad guy, that really you want to maybe get inside the heads of the characters.
Yeah.
You know, like Batman, Bruce Wayne, and everything else. So do you think that, sorry, you know, they're very excited next to them. do you think that an extra element of your writing was these character nuances
Oh,
that
yeah.
maybe some writers also had and maybe many didn't?
Well, I don't know, you know, everybody I'm sure came at it from their own standpoint, but that was what was interesting to me. I mean, you mentioned Batman. I mean, I love Batman with all the ambiance and the Joker and all the rest of that stuff, but I wanted to get inside Bruce Wayne's head. Yeah, I wanted to see who he was. I wanted to see who Steve Rogers was, which is why then, you know, probably I could write The Nomad, where Steve Rogers gave up being Captain America, because I wasn't tied to Captain America, I was tied to Steve Rogers. When I did Green Lantern Corps, somebody said to me, how can you do a group where they all have the same powers? And I said, well, it's not about the powers, you know, it's about the people in the group. That was, you know, so it was always, that was my approach. I would always come at it from who is this guy or this girl or whoever, and what would they do in this situation? That was kind of the way I plotted things. You know?
Steve knows also that, you know, he's always been my favorite writer. He's the favorite writer of a good number of people. And if ever I thought about why he's my favorite writer, one of the reasons is all these little character nuances. And so, if you enjoyed so much being inside the head of a Steve Rogers or inside the head of a Batman, how much did you enjoy actually having to come up with some villainous goings-on every month?
I like that too. I mean, I like comics, right? I mean, I like all the aspects of comics. I like the art, I like the punchiness of the stories, I like, you know, the villains. I can remember, I mean, again, very early on, coming up, I was going to do some story with some villain. I remember I was standing in the shower, I can remember the scene, I don't know which villain it was, but I was thinking, you know, as a young writer, I remember saying to myself, I don't want to just write this guy, I want to figure out something to do with this guy, even if he's the villain, you know. So I tried to give everybody a nuance, as you say, or, you know, something that would make them come a little more alive than they were.
So are you also saying then about getting into the heads of the villains as well? So first and foremost, getting into the heads of the good guys, and also getting into the heads of the bad guys, and then seeing what comes from that.
Yeah, I mean, you had to, I mean, the villain's gonna lose, you know that, but you had to, you know, at least I had to sort of figure out, why does he think he's gonna win? You know, what is his plan that's gonna work out great, except for the one thing that isn't, you know, or whatever. So it made, yeah, it made more, nuance seems to be the best word for it, but I mean, there was more stuff if you started
Right.
getting deeper into each character, you know.
Do you think or feel that there was ever a time when you kind of got away from that and you found yourself putting characters in a situation rather than the characters helping to stimulate it?
Yeah, there were, I mean, basically there was a couple of books that I just had no interest in. I mean, I ended up doing Skull the Slayer for one issue. I did Justice in the New Universe. Both of those books I couldn't get a handle on. I didn't, nothing about the characters interested me, you know, but it was an assignment, so I did my professional level best at it, but it was, those books were pretty much like moving chess pieces around without really caring much about the chess pieces. But most everything else that I mean, pretty much everything else that I did like, and if I liked it, you know, eventually you become a professional at whatever you're doing, so I could turn out a good Justice story if I had to, but most of the time it wasn't like because I have to, it's because I was interested in pursuing where the character was.
Why do you think then some writers seem to be totally focused on the story, meaning the good versus the bad, and there aren't these character nuances? Wouldn't they feel like you, this is a bit of a naive question, because everybody's different,
Yeah.
but in a sense, wouldn't they feel like you, like, okay, I'm interested in this character, I want to write this character, and sometimes you just feel like it's just like a throwaway story?
Well, I mean, everybody is different, and I can't really speak for, you know, what other people get out of what they're doing.
I know it's difficult to answer.
I can't, I mean, it's, I can only tell you what I did, you know?
Yeah, you see, logically, of course, the logic kind of affects me. It's like, well, if of course, maybe a bad analogy. If somebody like cooks one way and they cook well that way, then why doesn't everybody kind of just try to follow it in that way? But
Well, I mean, but, you know, some people do have a real feel for cooking, and other people are just following the recipe, and I mean, this isn't necessarily totally connected, but what we were doing, you know, all of us in the 70s and 80s, during the bulk of the Marble Age, whatever, we were creating stuff, you know, not always the best idea since we didn't own it, but, you know, we were building and creating and doing all this stuff, and I really got a sense, particularly in the 90s, that people were going, I really, really liked that thing that I read when I was a little kid. Now that I'm a professional, I'm going to recreate it, you know? I'm going to do it again. And that I never understood that particularly. I mean, it gave you pleasure, so you're going to hit that same switch, okay, but it's like just doing it over again didn't seem to be much interesting to me. But I mean, but it worked. I mean, it worked for the people who were doing it. They were pushing their pleasure button and doing that. I mean, and again, Roy Thomas, who, you know, Roy Thomas is a classic writer. He told me that he always approached the stories from the plot. He always figured out the plot and then made the characters fit the plot.
right.
And I always came at it from the characters and then made a plot out of that,
Right.
you know? But it's like, is Roy Thomas better or worse than me? I mean,
Right.
it's just like, you know, you can get there. You gotta have all those, that's the thing, you gotta have all those elements. I mean, if you don't have comic book elements, you're not writing a comic story, but it's just a question of the recipe, right?
You see, it's very interesting, of course, because, as you say, everybody's different, so all writers are different. Some writers maybe approach it from the character first, plot second. Some writers, plot first, character second. And among people in the room and readers, as I was, what appeals to us, maybe for some people, they're not really interested in all the character nuances for some reason. They really want the plot. And for readers like myself, yeah, the plots could be entertaining, but first and foremost, there's got to be aspects to the characterization. For me, otherwise, I lose interest. But I mean, there's a whole bucket load of things that we could say about that. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. When did you realize that you were interested in writing, and when did you realize that moment when you realized, wow, I can write?
Probably the first time I wrote for comics, which was a little 6-page story called Terror of the Pterodactyl.
I haven't.
I had wanted to be an artist. It was the comic book art that really sucked me in. Reading comics in the 50s, I recently had to go back and revisit them, and comics in the 50s pretty much were DC comics, and it was pretty much Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And Superman, I mean, there was nothing deep about any of that stuff. Some of that stuff is cool in and of itself for the era and all that, but the stories in the 50s when I was reading comics growing up, they weren't the thing that was going to suck me in. It was the art. So that's what I wanted to do. And to make a very long story extremely short, I ended up working on staff at Marvel, the lowest man on the totem pole, filling in for Gary Friedrich, who had been the lowest man on the totem pole, but he'd gone back to Missouri to take off for a while. And after a couple weeks, he was supposed to write this 6-page monster story, and he didn't feel like it. So we sent it back in, and Marvel kind of looked around the bullpen, and you want to write this thing, and it turned out I enjoyed writing. And it turned out they enjoyed what I wrote. So they said, oh, you want to write some more? It's like, sure, and that's how I ended up there. My father was a newspaper reporter. In fact, in his early career, he worked for the Dayton Daily News. So I had writing genes in me somewhere, but I had never really thought about being a writer until I wrote. And then I wrote, oh, well, I could do this. And I liked it.
Isn't that like kind of amazing though, really? Like, at least for me, sitting here, you have somebody who's not really thought about writing, doesn't really know if he can write, and gets given an assignment because somebody else is not around to do it, and then does it, and it turns out well. Because you could have done it, and it turned out badly.
Exactly, could have been bad. And Marvel in those days, again, they were still publishing romance books and monster books and westerns. And so the way they worked it was if they were thinking that you might work for them, you kind of did your apprenticeship on the non-superhero stuff so they could see, can you write? I mean, they didn't really care, can you write a romance story, but can you write a story that's interesting, even if it's, whatever genre it is. So you had to work your way up. But if you kept hitting the mark, then eventually they'd give you, something, and then once you sort of passed that threshold, then it was kind of like, how much work can you handle? I mean, if they thought you were doing a good job, then they'd give you another book, and then they'd give you another book, and then they'd give you another book. When I finally got started, when I finally got a superhero book, it was The Beast in Amazing Adventures, and a year later, I was writing the Avengers, the Defenders, Doc Savage, the Hulk, Luke Cage, Vampirella over on the side, Captain America. Oh, I forgot Captain America. I mean, it's like this is great, we'll do more. I mean, because the comic, there were so many comics, and, you know, they come out monthly, and they got, you know, somebody's got to do them, so. So then, you know, I mean, I never really had to look back. Never, you know, there was never, it just kind of kept snowballing the whole time. And, I kept liking it, kept getting new characters to play with, you know.
Yeah. But, you know, as you said, you like to get inside characters' heads and so on. But your first assignment was a 6-page story.
Yeah.
You know, very limited. So how did you approach that?
Lots of nuances in that pterodactyl.
Go back after, I'm gonna go home back to dig it out and read it.
No, I don't think that's true. You know, well, I mean, it's just like, I mean, the story was already plotted. I mean, I just dialogued
Oh, you
it,
just-
so there was nothing,
That's right.
I didn't create it.
Did Gary Friedrich do the
Yeah,
plot?
yeah.
So then you dialogue. But even then, your dialogue still had to be
Yeah,
okay.
you know, whatever I did, again, whatever seemed like the right thing to do, they liked it, so.
Right.
But you don't, I mean, if they hated it, that would have been the end of that.
Of course. And so after that one, Terrors of the Pterodactyls, Creatures on the Loose, isn't it? Yeah, I think it reached the number. I do have it. What came up next?
Well, the romance stuff.
Well, then they should feature the romance.
I did like 3 romance stories. I did a Western. They were going to relaunch the Ringo Kid, and I wrote an issue of that, which didn't ever get published, but in-house, they were, you know, they saw it. But then again, you know, eventually it got to the Beast, and then it went on to romance.
When you did the romance stuff, did you do Patsy Walker?
No, in the Beast, the deal was the X-Men was,
Sorry, you brought her into the Beast.
that's what I was gonna say. X-Men was a failed book at that time. If you don't know that, it's probably amazing, but X-Men had failed, but they were still part of the Marvel Universe, and I was doing low man on the totem pole book like the Beast. The idea was, maybe if they don't work, maybe one of them will, and particularly we're doing well with werewolves right now, so we'll make him more like a werewolf, and we'll, you know, we'll go from there. So I had the other X-Men to play with, but I didn't really have anybody else that was endemic to the Beast. So I brought Patsy Walker, and she had, you know, Patsy Walker was a romance heroine. And when Reed and Sue got married in Fantastic Four Annual number 4, I think, something like that, Stan had a thing where Reed and Sue come out of the church, and there's this crowd of New Yorkers, and among them were Patsy and Hetty. So he had taken them and moved them to the background of the superhero, and nothing had ever come of that. But I just thought, okay, she's available. Nobody's using Patsy Walker, so brought her into the Beast. And was building the story where she does the Beast a favor, but she says, you have to do something for me. And then the series got canceled, and we never found out what that was. So later, when I was doing the Avengers, and we were redoing the team, the X-Men was still a failed book. This was still before the new X-Men. So I put the Beast in the Avengers, and I thought, well, here's a chance to pay off that storyline that we never got. So that's where Patsy Walker showed up, and it turns out what she wanted was to become a superheroine, and so she became the Hellcat. And so if they get to Jessica Jones season 3, apparently you will see that, you know, their version of it, whatever. But that's on, you know, she's now Trish Walker on that, if people aren't making that
Her
connection.
mother still calls her Pats.
Yeah, and Kilgrave called her Patsy
Yeah.
too, but I kind of like the name. I mean, I can understand why a career woman would be Trish rather than Patsy, but I like Patsy Walker as a name, you know.
Have you guys been watching Jessica Jones season 2? So every time, I'm up to episode 5, so if you're past that, you know, please don't say anything. But every time she takes a hit of that thing, you know, and her eyes start flaring up, it's like obvious where this is going to end up eventually, like Steve says, maybe in season 3 or something, obviously. You know, again, when I talk about like little touches, nuances of character, there are other kind of nuances as well. And when I was reading Avengers, when Steve was writing it, and also I had read the Beast series as well, Amazing Adventures, it appeals to like a reader like me that somebody, like a writer, would take a character like a Patsy Walker and bring her into like, you know, mainstream Marvel comics and give her some background. I remember she had an abusive military husband named Biff or something.
It was her boyfriend.
Or boyfriend?
The guy who'd been the boyfriend in the romance books.
Ah,
Nice
yeah,
guy
see?
in the romance books, but
Yeah.
turned out he had a dark side.
And then,
Yeah.
then you bring her in like that, and you know, these are great touches. For me,
Well, see, but continuity was the thing then. You know, when I got there, it was only 10 years into the Marvel Universe. So, you know, the Patsy Walker I was writing, the Thor I was writing, the Beast I was writing, they were the same guys who you'd been following right along, and so their histories and all that was, and, you know, Stan had set that up. The histories were important, the previous appearances were important, things that happened paid off later, you know, whatever. I totally get why, you know, 60 years into this, it's impossible
Yeah.
to do that kind of thing. But at the time, that was part and parcel of Marvel, and I really liked that.
Yeah.
Same thing, you know, I liked the fact that it was a coherent, ongoing universe.
So it's kind of unfortunate for us now, really. Again, like Steve says, there's so many decades have gone by. I don't think you can really do things like this anymore. But, you know, 13 years into it, whatever, you could.
Well, I mean, the idea was, of course, that for a while, everybody was supposed to be sort of aging in real time. But I mean, Peter Parker would have grandchildren by now, if that was the case, so,
Yeah, of course.
you know.
Of course. So, you know, actually, it hurts me a little bit to hear Steve say X-Men was a failure, because the very first Marvel comic I read was X-Men #1. I read it in '67, and that was it for me. You know, I forgot about DC, I forgot about Harvey Comics and Richie Rich and all the others, and X-Men #1 just did it for me.
X-Men was a good book.
And of course, and also these stories in X-Men from about like issue like about 10 or 11 until about 19 for me is the best run, or one of the best runs in the history of comic books. But yes, I mean it was cancelled. So even though it was cancelled, you actually got to write a lot of X-Men, or you used them a fair bit. Of course, the Beast and the Amazing Adventures, but then also you used them in Captain America and Secret Empire and other characters, including Banshee and so on. You used them also in the Hulk with the Beast and the Mimic and all this kind of stuff. So did you use them because they were available? Did you use them because you really liked them as characters, or both?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question.
Well, you know, if you're the Fantastic Four writer, you're in charge of Doctor Doom. You're in charge of the Mole Man. You're in charge, you know, so you have this stable of characters that you can work with. And if somebody else wants to use Doctor Doom, they come to you. I mean, the way we did it, you know, you'd go to the other guy and you'd say, can I use Doctor Doom? And you'd figure out how that would work, and then you would do that. But there was, you know, the X-Men was a failed book, so there was no sort of X-Men group other than the X people, as you say, Banshee or whoever. So I started using them out of, I liked them. I had liked the X-Men books, so I liked them. And they were available. You know, nobody else, they weren't assigned to anybody because there was no actual X-Men book. So I did, yeah, I mean, I was kind of the de facto X-Men writer for, you know, for several years, just because I could use them, so I did.
Would you have liked, I'm asking this, and halfway through the question I'm thinking, well, of course he's going to say yes. Would you have liked to have written an X-Men series?
Yes.
What would have appealed to you most if they said, Steve, we're reviving the X-Men, and here you go?
Well, it would have been interesting because, I mean, you're taking the new X-Men completely out of the equation. So
Right.
the only X-Men to think about would have been the original
Right.
X-Men, whom I liked. But I mean, when that book died, it was Roy Thomas and Neil Adams doing that book, and it died. I mean, my take on the X-Men, I mean, this is, you know, X-Men and Avengers came out the same month. They debuted the same month, and they were both bi-monthly. But pretty soon, Avengers became monthly, and X-Men didn't. And eventually, X-Men did, but they were lagging like a year behind the Avengers. And of course, this is the Avengers, so these guys are going to look like the second-rate characters. And they were sort of, again, since they didn't catch on as quick, they kind of were the second-rate. And I think it just was embedded in everybody's mind in the great hierarchy of the Marvel Comics at the time that the X-Men was kind of like a second-tier book, which is, that's the only explanation I've got as to why it never really took off. And again, it was being done, those last issues were fabulous, and they didn't sell. So you really did need to kind of recreate them. You needed to start over, I think. And I don't know that would have occurred to me. If they said do the X-Men, I probably would have tried to take the X-Men as they existed and see if I could make those guys work, So it wouldn't have gone that way. It took Dave Cockrum and Len Wein to figure out something else to do.
So once you got going, so you went, let's see, we've gone from Terror of the Pterodactyl to romance and some Western to Beast in Amazing Adventures. Now we're kind of moving on from there. Did you feel like, as a writer, you were just picking up speed, or picking up steam fairly easily, or what did you struggle with most?
I don't, I'm sure I struggled here and there, but there was nothing in particular. But I do feel like every story I wrote, I was learning new stuff that I could then throw back into the mix. I remember on my first Beast, I wrote the script and I went in the next day and talked to Archie Goodwin, who I guess happened to be there. And I said, Archie, I've got all this stuff that I want to put on the splash page, but I don't see where the room is for that. And he says, well, then you can't put it there because there's no room. And I said, oh, but I want to say this and I want to say that. And he said, don't worry, you write comics long enough, you'll be able to say everything you ever wanted to say. So okay, so now I learned, okay, that's a step, and you kind of just go step. If you've read comics, it's not an unfamiliar looking thing, but still, when it's actually up to you to do it, you have to learn the nuances. But there weren't, it wasn't rocket science really, and comics did come out. They came out 3 months after you wrote them. And then you would immediately start getting actual letters in the mail from people reacting to them. So, 3 months after you wrote something, you'd get a lot of feedback. And so and this was a continuous loop, right? Where you're going, oh, well, let's try this. Oh, they like that. Okay, well then I could do that. Oh, they don't like that. Well then, it's that's how, I was writing for the mass market, so I was interested in what people thought about what I was doing.
Of course. And your writing on the B series was very lively, very entertaining, and I'm sure you had fun with it because you included the Rutland thing with the other Marvel people. But it only lasted like 5-6 issues, and I guess because it didn't sell well enough.
Right.
So that's despite your best efforts, it didn't sell well enough. So did you feel discouraged by that, or people said to you, listen, don't worry, it was always going to be a hard sell anyway?
Yes, I can answer all your questions with the word yes, probably.
There you go.
It didn't sell. I gave it my best shot and I couldn't sell it. But nobody held that against me. Again, if they said, well, that was your shot and it didn't work, goodbye, then there was that. But they thought, well, he's writing good stories. It's just, we're not interesting enough people. But by that time also, I'd been given Captain America and the Defenders, certainly, and maybe even the Avengers by that time. In-house, people were happy with what I was doing. And so when Beast went under, I had other things that I was already doing. Basically, Captain America, when they gave me that book, they said this book is about to fail. Nobody likes this symbol of World War II during the Vietnam War with our college-age audience. We can't sell this book. It's probably going to get canceled. unless you can figure something out, you know, and I don't think that they expected me to figure anything out, but I figured out that what he should stand for is American ideals, not World War II. Because American ideals, you can use that anytime, right? I mean, it's not tied to something, and it transcends whatever America is actually doing at this time. And that is where I became, you know, that's where they said, okay, I mean, that's where I got a career, I think, you know. I figured out how to save Captain America. Which at the time, you know, that's a good thing, but it wasn't like now, you know, Captain America today, he's a much bigger guy than he was then, because he wasn't a big guy. He was kind of like a failing concept. But it was certainly, you know, when I did the Captain America stuff, that's when people said, because it went from nearly failing to a #1 book in 6 months, which you could do in those days on newsstand sales. Things turned around really quick. And, I mean, in all honesty, that's where people went, okay, this guy,
I'd like maybe, I'm going to say something kind of arrogant. I've been accused of being arrogant once or twice in my life. And because, again, like Steve was saying, Captain America was about to fail. It was just a throwaway, without disrespect to the people who were doing it, it was just a throwaway comic book. Who's Captain America up against this month and next month and so on?
well, it comes back, it comes back to the whole character thing. I mean, everybody was treating him as a guy with a flag on his chest who had superhero adventures. Nobody was really getting into who is Steve Rogers and what does that mean.
This is where my little arrogant point comes in, because even when I was much younger than I am now, it strikes me that the approach that you took is like one step away from like obvious, because it's not just another superhero. It can't be just another superhero throwaway book. So who is the character of Captain America? The next step must be, well, he must, for example, represent like American ideals. And if he represents American ideals, can that provide the fuel for the stories? What I'm saying is I don't understand how the people who came before didn't think like this, and that they just turned out issue after issue. Why wouldn't they have stepped back and said, like you said, no, it should be about a man who represents American ideals, and where does that take us in terms of stories?
Well, again, it's your thing about cooking. I mean, it's just that's how I come at stuff, and other people. I mean, yeah, why didn't they think of it? I don't know, but they didn't, you know. And you know, I'm just sitting there as a young guy trying to keep a job, going, what would make this work? And fortunately, I get on the thing that would make it work.
So when you did your first story arc for Captain America, which was the 4 issues, I believe, I suppose you were very excited because you thought, okay, great, I get to play with this. How about we do this story where there was that Captain America in the 50s, but if Captain America supposedly was frozen from World War II, then who was that guy that appeared in Captain America comics in the 50s? And what a great thing to play with.
Well, that was exactly Roy Thomas's idea. When he gave me the book, he said, here's an idea that you might want to mess with. Why, who was this guy if he was supposed to have been frozen in ice at that time? So, you know, I took that idea and, you know, my approach when I would take over a book then, as having been a comic fan, having collected all books, you know, whatever, I'd go back and reread all the books and be looking, you know, here's a plot line, here's a character thing, here's something that did work or something that didn't work. What can I, you know, because the continuity was important, so what is there that would get this thing? And so I had the one idea of making him stand for American ideals, and I had this other, you know, Roy said do something maybe with this 50s Captain America, so I was able to set up the 50s Captain America as this rabid anti-communist, bigot, whatever, and my Captain America who stood for more than that. And I mean, so it was very synergistic. It all worked, everything fit together really nicely, and that idea served me very well in trying to say this is who this guy is. And again, I mean, that was 4 issues, and 6 issues in, it was the #1 book, so,
Yeah.
and, you know.
What a great way to start.
And again, for people who aren't old enough to have been around in that period, the books were on sale on newsstands. This was before comic book shops. It was just right next to Time and Life and the rest of it. And they were selling 750,000 copies. So, if you know, the story I hear a lot these days is that, you know, if somebody comes up to you and says, you know, you really ought to read this particular book, you go down to the comic book store and there aren't any, because they only ordered as many as people had said they were going to, you know, so you can't, like, it's hard. But in those days, if somebody said, Captain America, you know, you could go to any newsstand and you could buy it, you know. So it was easy to turn things around really quickly because everybody could shift and move very, very freely.
When, again, like I said at the beginning, I think, that when I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, when I rediscovered American comics after a 5-year absence when I was 13, the first one I came across was Steve's Avengers, like 113. And then that got me back in, got me interested. And as I told Steve downstairs, I opened the page, I'm 13 years old, it says Stainless Steve Englehart, and I thought, who the hell is this Stainless Steve Englehart? And, you know, and here he is, you know, like many years later. But because of great writing that Steve produced, then it made readers like me think, okay, I want to write comic books as well. And so for a time, many years later, I think during my college years, I actually did like a number of like 1-page synopses of stories. And I remember Carl Potts, who was an editor at Wild Time, telling me you've got good potential and you keep at it and something like that. But when I thought about it in later years, and I thought, well, something was missing. I'm a good comic book reader, I love Steve's stories, Steve's inspiring me to try and write stories. And I thought, I'm only interested in the characters who happen to be, like Peter Parker happens to be Spider-Man. Steve Rogers happens to be Captain America. Tony Stark happens to be Iron Man. Now you said that you're interested in getting inside the characters, and I would say me too. My thought was, okay, here's Peter Parker, here's somebody in this whatever situation, what does it do to him? But I could never get as interested in the characters of the supposed villains as you seem to. Because I think that's a key thing, which I never really thought about until right now. That you were also interested in getting in the heads of the villains. Why are they doing what they're doing? So I found when I was trying to turn out these synopses that that was hard for me. There were very few villains that actually interested me. If there was one like Steve Gerber created a villain called the Fool Killer, and he left a calling card, something like live life like a poem or die a fool. And I thought, wow, that's great. I'm not interested in people who want to take over the world. That's my problem. I'm interested in villains like Fool Killer who think, you know, you're a fool, and you deserve to be eliminated because you're not living life like a poem. But you were able to get into the heads of the supposed villains, whoever they were, and write them just as effectively as from the hero side.
Yeah, well, I mean, I mean, now it's become a cliche in the last half hour, but I mean,
yes,
I really liked the characters, and so it didn't matter. I mean, again, with Captain America, he was partners with the Falcon, and the Falcon had been a pleasant enough character, but he didn't have much going on either. So I got interested in the Falcon too, you know, and the Falcon's girlfriend, and you know, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
because we only have 15. That's why we have a part 2 tomorrow, because I knew this would happen.
Okay.
I mean, we could be here for like 10 hours, of course, or something.
Well, probably
So-
somebody else is coming in here longer or whatever, but I'm,
Right.
you know, I'm willing to answer
Yeah.
questions as
Yeah.
long as.
Do you have questions written down, or you just want to ask questions?
Yeah, go ahead and ask.
Yeah, because I've asked plenty today. I'll ask more tomorrow. Go ahead.
So mine kind of goes along with what you've been saying, but if you said you were writing different stories for different characters kind of at the same time, how do you switch between the different character motivations that you're writing if you're working on several different stories at once, or are you not writing several different stories?
Well, they were all, each character was clear to me. I mean, my general working structure was every week, I wrote a book a week, basically, for a month was usually what I was doing. I'd spend 2 days figuring out the story. What do I want to do? How does this, where does it, just, that's a thing, and it takes a while to kind of put the pieces together. Then I'd spend 3 days actually writing it, 8 pages a day or 7 pages a day, whatever I needed to do to get through the thing. And then one day to just let it sit there and see if, did I forget something? Is there something that I want to do? 1 day off, and then start again, right? But I had no trouble, writing Captain America and then the next week writing the Avengers and not thinking about Captain America for 3 weeks and then coming back and then picking it up again. Again, just that was something I could do. I don't know if that's hard for other people, but I was very, I never got really confused. I wrote a kind of New Deal Democrat Captain America. I wrote a much more right-wing, not as right-wing as he became, but I write right-wing Batman. Each character was different. That's sort of an extreme example, but and they're all different. So I said the thing about people with the same powers, but they're different characters. Yeah, I just, not a problem for me. Yeah.
Going back to your work ethic in that time, were you writing what they called the Marvel way?
Yeah, mostly.
Where
yeah.
the artists were doing the plot?
Well, no, the artists
you
were...
got it to fill in
No.
words.
I guess there's 2 versions of the Marvel way then. I would do the plot,
Okay.
but I would just sort of write the plot, like, here's the plot,
Okay.
Leave it to the artist to break that down into what it looks like on the page. And then I would get that back and I would write the dialogue. That's my favorite way of doing it, because then I'm seeing the actual art that you're seeing. The other way, of course, is to write script in advance, where you say, panel 1, this is happening, he says because then if the artist forgets something, it's too late, If you're expecting some art to be there and it's not there, you can't correct for it, really. It's the stories of Stan Lee sort of handing Jack Kirby, I want this guy and this guy now, you make up the story. That was their thing, but that's not how I did it
Okay.
when we did it.
And did the artists have input? Did you work with the artists, talk to the artists? Did they
Yeah.
have input as to where things wanted to go to?
Yeah, usually, we were an assembly line, really. Everybody had to do his job within his time frame in order to get these books out. And so, if I was plotting stuff and I had stuff that I wanted to talk over with the artist, I would call him up and we would do that. Generally, once the plot went in, the artist just drew it. The thing about comic book artists, good comic book artists, is they can draw anything. So you never get people calling you up and going, no, you got horses here and I can't draw horses, or whatever. So there, and again, the system wouldn't work if people were continually going back to the last step and trying to change this and that. So you kind of rolled with whatever was there. And sometimes I would co-plot. I did Doctor Strange with like Frank Runner, and we would sit there and talk it out. There were things like that. But in general, I'd get the plot and I'd send it to the guy and he would draw it. And that's pretty much how it worked. Yeah.
Thanks for saving the cat. And have you enjoyed seeing like the Marvel Universe movies? Like, has that been cool for you, or has it been disappointing? Or like, how do you like Chris Evans as Captain America, or Tony Stark being played by Junior?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. My biggest objection is Mantis. The Mantis on screen has nothing to do with the Mantis that I created. I get my name on screen, Mantis created by, but it's not my Mantis. So it's not a perfect it's not a perfect world, but I mean, I like Chris Evans as Captain America, and that is, you know, I mean, Jack Kirby gets his name up there for having created Captain America, and well, he should, but that's my Captain America on screen, that's not Jack Kirby's Captain America, and I don't get any credit for that. But, you know, I mean, you get credit for who you created, I understand that. Star-Lord I'm very happy with. This next movie, I haven't seen it. I don't see the movies any sooner than you do. I know nothing, they don't involve us in that. But it's Captain America putting on a black suit and deciding not to be Captain America, but they're telling me that's not Nomad. That's Captain America. You know, it's like, well, it sure looks like Nomad to me, but, you know, so I mean, there's business things involved in there. But in general, I mean, I like the movies a lot, and I like the fact that they had a plan. I mean, you know, I give tremendous credit to Robert Downey Jr., because if that first Iron Man movie had tanked, none of the rest of this would have happened, right? But they got the right guy, and he made that movie work, and then they could keep going, and now they've built this whole, and now we're almost to the part where all those original guys leave, and you know, apparently Sebastian Stan is going to end up being Captain America down the line here, you know, and I guess we'll get War Machine, or we'll get something to take over for Tony Stark, which is, you know, it's interesting. The thing I find about the movies, again, sorry, I'll try to wrap this up, but comics has a particular sort of punchiness to the storylines, you know, I mean, boom, 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 and movies have a different rhythm. And so, and when I first started seeing the movies, I was like, you know, this is like, it's not punchy enough, really. But that's how movies work, you know. So you get into that, and again, I am only a bystander, so I'm just giving you my bystander's take on the whole thing. But in general, yeah, you know, I wish Mantis were better. Yeah.
You talk about connecting with your characters in the books that you write. When you did Justice League with Dick Dillon,
Yeah.
I thought, as I read it at the time, that you were connecting with Mark Shaw, Manhunter character. And it seemed to me, obviously, that was your centerpiece. But to be honest, I didn't really feel that you connected with the Justice League itself.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, you know, what was your feelings when you were writing that book?
Well, they asked me to come over and sort of, you know, reestablish them all. That Marvel, you know, Marvel had really surpassed DC significantly by that point. So they, you know, they basically hired me to come over and do, I mean, they said in so many words, we want you to do for the Justice League what you did with the Avengers. You know, give them all personalities and do stuff. So, you know, I took my best shot at that and had a good time doing it. I'm sorry you didn't like it, but
Well,
you know.
I just, like I said, it just didn't feel like, you know, most of your stuff that I read, I could see, you know, you connecting with all the characters. I just didn't feel that same connection with the Justice League members.
Well, I mean, the Justice League, again, I was sort of starting from ground zero in a sense. I mean, they'd been around for a long time, but they were basically people in costumes, end of story. And I was supposed to give them all characters, so I was inventing the characters, not entirely out of whole cloth, because again, I went back and read, you know, what Adam had done over the years, etc. But what you were seeing was basically taking people who established themselves here and trying to move them or expand them or do whatever. I mean, so the basic premise was they're not good enough as they stand, see if you can do better. So possibly that's where you got the idea that I wasn't connecting with them. I was connecting as best I could and trying to turn them into something else. They're finally reprinting that stuff too, by the way. You know, it's never been reprinted in all these years, but finally they're going to come out with the Justice League Omnibus like now. Pretty much in March. Maybe it's already out. I don't know, but see what a new generation of people thinks about that stuff, because it's been pretty much invisible for a long time. Yeah.
it was a unique book. It was a unique book because Dick Dillon did it. You know, it had the same look for 10 years.
No kidding.
It was weird. You know, it was hard to.
Yeah, no, I loved I loved comics, and so the idea of working with Dick Dillon was cool for me. I did that one story about the whole 50s, the origin of the Justice League in the 50s, just so I could throw in like the Blackhawks, which was Dick Dillon's thing, and Congarella and Rex the Wonder Dog and all the rest of these great DC characters at the time. But yeah, and a funny thing there is, when they asked me to come over and give all these guys personalities, do what you did with the Avengers, I said, well, if I'm going to give them all personalities and I'm going to tell a story, I can't do that in 17 pages. So I need a monthly double-sized book. And DC they were desperate, and so fine, so we did 34-page stories on the Justice League, right? In the year 2000, Tom Brevoort came to me and said, we're going to bring the Malibu characters, the Ultraverse characters, into the Marvel Universe, and we want you to do that. And I said, well, it's kind of the same deal. I'm going to need, if I'm going to bring all these characters in that the Marvel people don't know, I'm going to need a double-sized book. And they said, there is nobody today who can draw 34 pages that people would want to see, that fans want to see. And there's nobody that fans want to see who can draw 34 pages. And then the whole project didn't happen anyway. But I thought that was interesting, and it made me appreciate Dillon even more at that point. I mean, it's like, hey, Dick, your book just doubled in size. Fine, and he didn't care. So,
We have time for one more.
yeah.
Earlier you mentioned working at Marvel at the stage you were creating things, and later that changed. And recently Jim Starlin described that era of working at Marvel as working in the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any kind of like workplace culture shock when you left that environment to go to DC, or later when Shooter took over?
Yeah, all that. DC is much more corporate than Marvel, always has been. They don't like, as I found out, they don't like individuals to be associated with their characters. They want it all just to be DC. If you look at the credits for Gotham, it says based on DC characters, And now they give Bob Kane the thing for credit. But I mean, they don't, they're just corporate. It all's supposed to spring from the brow of DC Comics, whereas Marvel was more creator-oriented. But talking about the Malibu characters, Steve Gerber and I worked on the Malibu characters in the 90s, and when Malibu was kind of like getting started, they took all of us writers, they took us to a resort in Scottsdale, Arizona for 4 days, and all we were supposed to do was like be creative and think up the universe and think up our characters. It was really fun. If you're a creative kind of person, it was really fun. And about the third day, Gerber and I were sitting by a pool, and we said, that's the way it used to be. And we had lost that over time, I mean, that was very unique to Marvel in that period. And as you say, DC was not on that wavelength. Shooter was not on that wavelength. Shooter was tasked with making the trains run on time. So, I mean, he had to be more officious about the whole thing. But little by little, it's like the lobster in the pot, right? Little by little, we had lost. And it ruined me in one sense, because my first job, when you get your first job, you don't say, well, let's renegotiate that. You go, thanks for giving me the job, right? So when I got my first job, they said, you can have complete creative freedom. So everything was downhill after that, in one sense or another. So yeah, you had to learn that not everybody was like that, but like I said, I'm a professional.
As I said, 1 hour was never going to be enough. That's why we have same time, same back channel tomorrow. If you come back 12 o'clock, we'll be here. Steve will be here.
Also, I have a table down in the room, so if you want to come by and talk there, that's fine too.
And thanks for your questions. They were actually very interesting. I'm sorry I took up so much time. Did you ask the first question? So, it's a millennium for you. All right, see you tomorrow.